What's up, Overflow City? Always so good to be with you. It's your favorite uncle, Brandon Shank, and honored to be with you today. I have been a little bit under the weather the last couple of weeks, and so this is the first time that I have been able to preach in 2024, and it's to you. I can't think of anybody better. I can't think of a better moment. Over Christmas, I got that cough that never ends. And so my wife actually preached last week at our church. I said, listen, I'm going to hack a shack. I'm going to cough the whole way through this thing. And she did an incredible job. But today, I'm going to get through this without hopefully coughing throughout the entire message. But it's awesome to be able to be with you today with Paul and Christina. I love your pastors so much. They're good friends, but they're people that believe in you when you don't believe in yourself. And that's what they've been for me. You know, Pastor Paul and Pastor Christina, love you. Can we just thank them? Thank them for how great they are. Let's honor your pastors. So grateful for them. So grateful for shepherds that are willing to lead and for people that are willing to pour in. And so, Paul and Christina, we love you. So grateful for you. Thank you for this opportunity. I love preaching the gospel. But I'll tell you this, there was a time in my life where I had to make the gospel an overflow of my relationship with Jesus. Preaching the gospel had to become that overflow. It couldn't become the source. So when early into ministry, there was this part where I was unsure about how to really pastor, about how to really communicate, because I felt like it turned into a job for me. I felt like as I preached the gospel, it was becoming a job, and that if I studied the word, it was to preach. Not that what I was preaching was an overflow of my time with God. And I think maybe for some of you, you can feel this way. I would propose that a lot of us end up having disciplines that bring us closer to God, but they start to feel more like work. But the reality is disciplines are things you don't always want to do. You know, you don't always want to talk to your spouse because you're having a rough day, but you need to if you want a healthy relationship. You don't always want to talk to God, but you need to if you want to have a healthy relationship. You don't always want to eat well, but if you want to live long, you need to. You don't always want to work out, but you need to. That's what disciplines are. But I think sometimes we miss the intimacy because of the disciplines. We say, hey, we're going to be disciplines in these things, and we lack the relationship piece. And that's why seasons of fasting and prayer are so important. For a lot of us, they're reminders of times that I don't need to eat as much as I eat. I eat way too many sweets. I don't need fasting to tell me that. I can tell you, I eat way too many sweets. I could have chicken and broccoli every night, but you give me that chocolate brownie, that's what I need. I need to polish off that meal, right? But for a lot of us during this time of fasting, we see that when we push back from things, whether it's social media or food or television, that we are over consumers of a lot of things, but oftentimes we're under consumers of the things that are the healthiest. We're under consumers of physical things that are healthy, but really we under consume the things that are offered to us that'll change our life. Whether it's learning the word, praying, really leaning into God. Man, we spend so much time trying to figure this thing out. We spend so much time trying to figure out how to live effectively for God and how to be incredible men and women of God and how to get to the right college, how to invest in the right things, how to do the right job. But what if we consumed God the way that we consume other things? What would our approach be? Well, there's a story that I want to share with you that I feel relates this well in today's terms. It's a story where there are some people involved that their consumption of the things of God, the way that they yearn for Him, creates a peace in the middle of darkest times of their life. And not a peace where it makes you oblivious to the storm, but a peace that gives you rest in the middle of a storm. And not necessarily rest that you can wake up and feel refreshed and stretch out, but rest where you know God's in front of us. Rest where you know He's before us. And it's a story some of you may be familiar with of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these men were guys who got raised up with Daniel. They were actually young men at the time. The whole caveat of this story is that these men were ripped out of the things that they knew and taken to a place that they didn't know. When the Babylonians took over Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar brought these young men into his court. And the front runner for that is Daniel, Daniel and the lion's den. And Daniel, this young man that refused to eat the king's meat, and so he ate vegetables. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these gentlemen were a part of that regime with Daniel. They benefited because of Daniel's obedience, but because they were right there with him saying, hey, we're going to fulfill what God has for our life. And then the King Nebuchadnezzar, he gets big on himself, and Daniel ends up interpreting a dream and says, hey, you can give me this responsibility, but I also want you to give responsibility to these young men. And so these young men took over as overseers of the affairs of this empire. And King Nebuchadnezzar builds this statue to himself because he's doing well. What he didn't know was that one reason he was doing well is because he's appointing men of God over affairs of the areas of which he was leading. So he builds this massive statue. And some of you may have heard about this in Sunday school when you were little. For others, this may be the first time you're hearing about this story. But it's a king who was almost on the edge of narcissism. Maybe he was fully narcissistic, and he was building this statue to himself. And he was wanting everybody to bow down to it. He was now taking credit for the things that God was doing through the men of God that he appointed. And in Daniel chapter 3, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the statue that he had set up. So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And said, verse 4, so then a herald shouted out, people of all races, nations, and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue. And it says, anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews. Tattletales. You gotta love the tattletales, right? It says, they said to Nebuchadnezzar, long live the king. Kiss ups, right? That's how it works. Tattletales, they start by kissing up. It says, you issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and to worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments. Well, that decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold statue that you have set up. And so then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. And when they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue that I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you'll be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Yeah, we'll say he's a full narcissist at this point. We'll say he is fully locked in to who he thinks he is. He's all powerful. He is the one that people are bowing down to. He has a statue, not a statue outside of a stadium that's a homage to a great athlete, but a statue that is overwhelming, that can be seen from a long distance away, in homage to him as if he has done something great. And so he tells these men, he says, you're going to bow down or you're going to die. You're going to do what I'm asking you to do. The interesting thing about this statue is the reason that he built it is he's still young into his kingdom. He's young into his authority. And he's trying to do something to what he believes. Nebuchadnezzar believes this will unify the empire. He believes this is going to bring people together because they're coming under his leadership. They're coming under what he believes is authority that he's given to himself. But what he doesn't realize is that he is being a divisive king because he's creating a division in the spiritual world. He is saying, you're going to worship me, and then everything else is second, which is contrary to what people who follow Jesus, or at this time following God, would be. It's saying, no, I'm not going to follow you. I'm not going to follow your statutes and bow down to your statues because God is my God. And I wonder how many of us are in these same places. We actually think we're doing things to help, but we're creating division. And what we're actually meaning for good is hurting us. Things that we think we're asking God for, we think is in the best interest of our life, but they're divisive to what the Spirit is actually trying to do through us. We're asking for things. And maybe right now, let me encourage you with this. Maybe this time of fasting and prayer, you're praying for something and you're believing for it. But I would ask you to take a step back. And I would say, is what you're praying for something that you want put on God's heart, or is it something that he has put on your heart? Is this something that you believe is in your best interest? Or is it something that God has said, pray for it and believe it, and I will do it? Listen, you're not a bad person or at fault because you're praying for things that you say, well, maybe God's not putting this in me. But I think this is our responsibility. We can become very negligent when we pray and believe for things, because sometimes we're praying and believing for things that are actually divisive to what the Spirit's trying to do in our life. I got 4 boys, 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, soon to be 8-year-old. No, he is 8. Soon to be 9-year-old. See how that works? And a soon to be 7-year-old. And my boys, we have movie nights, and we do movie nights. They break out the popcorn. My 7-year-old, about to be 7-year-old, he can't make anything, but what he can make is popcorn. And so if he makes you a special snack, you'll walk up and you'll see 15 cookies with a bowl of popcorn and a candy cane sticking out of it. He loves to make popcorn. And so movie nights, he makes popcorn for everybody. And we always put candy in the bottom of the popcorn, something we've always done. And so they love it. If they can do a movie night and skip dinner, they would do it. And they would go to bed hungry, not caring, because they got their popcorn, they got their candy, they got their candy canes. But if I let them do that all the time, if they were asking for movie nights and we had movie nights and we gave them the popcorn and we had a great time, eventually it would rot their teeth in their minds to have movie nights all the time, to have all the popcorn on their teeth, the candy on their teeth, send them straight to bed. And over time, there would be malnutrition. Over time, there would be sickness. Over time, you will be able to see these people are not taking very good care of their children. Why is that? Well, because my kids don't know what's best for them. They know what they like. They know they love popcorn. They know they love the family coming together for the movie night. They know they love the surprise of whatever candy is put in the bottom, whether it's some Chewy Sprees, come on somebody, or if it's some Rolos, another classic, or if it's licorice, which is disgusting. They don't know what's in the bottom of that popcorn, but what they do know is that they love it. And I wonder how many of us take this posture of a child, where we want God to do things, we love things, and we know it brings us what we believe is happiness, but really it's a masking of something deeper. And we're asking him for it, and he's saying, but you don't understand, this is not something that in the long term is going to be healthy for you. I mean, how many of us have prayed for a promotion that God allowed us to have that almost destroyed our life? How many of us have prayed for a financial miracle that once we got the financial miracle, we realized that the miracle really wasn't in the finances, but it was in the journey? Now, how many of us have been in a position where we prayed for our spouse to come back, and when they did, we wish they hadn't? Now, I'm not saying that financial miracles aren't great. I'm not saying that reconciliation in marriage is not great. All of those things are powerful. But what I propose to you is that, are we asking for things that God has stirred our heart for? Or are we asking for things that we want to stir his heart for? Because God doesn't need to be aroused and passionate about things that you're passionate about. He's already passionate about you. He's already completely in love with who you are. And when King Nebuchadnezzar is building these statues, and his Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saying, we're not bound down to that. There's not a chance that we bow down to this. This authority that he's trying to establish, God's already established. And I think sometimes when we go through times of fasting and prayer, we're hoping that it's a remedy, that it's an equation that equals God doing something. Well, I can promise you don't have to fast and pray for God to do something. He's doing it. Fasting and prayer doesn't bring God closer to us. It brings us closer to God. It helps us see him differently. And as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are saying, we're not bowing down to this. King Nebuchadnezzar thought that he was bringing the entire empire together by unifying them under himself. And God is saying, no. That's not the way this is going to work. This empire has only seen the success that it's seen because of Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. You might have taken Judah as the Babylonian king, but these men that are appointed are walking in my goodness. That's when you'll see the fruit of the things that you're praying and asking God for. That's when you'll see the DNA of what he actually wants to do. But I love their response when they come before the king and he's saying, you're going to be destroyed. I'm going to put you in this fire. We're going to turn this thing up and it's going to be hotter than anything you've ever understood. How many of you feel, let me see your hands, if you can say, you feel like you have experienced a fire in your life in the last year or year and a half that you think is hotter than anything you have before experienced? Come on, raise them up. Let's be honest. Keep them up. Now look around. Give everybody that smile, like, yeah, we're all in the same boat together. You're probably worse than me, but we're in the same boat together. All right, now you can put them down. I want you to see the people that raise their hand because I want you to know you're not alone. I could raise my hand. Yeah, I've been in some hot fires in the last year and a half, but I will tell you that my deliverer has been consistent. That God's intention is never for you to die in the middle of the fire. There are times we feel like we've died, but he will always resurrect the dead things. As morbid as that may sound, I want you to understand in the spiritual realm of the things that you're praying and believing God for, he's already in front of you. He sees you. Don't make fasting be heavy. Don't make this time of prayer be so heavy of God, I want to honor you, and in turn you honor me. Let it be a time of God, I just want you. Because the tried and true testing doesn't come from just the trials. It comes from what are you connected to that keeps you persevering? What is it that keeps you going? I think a lot of times people say, well, the Bible can get boring. No, people that read the Bible can get boring. The Bible's not boring. It's powerful. It's sharp. And when you read stories like this, you can read them over and over and over, and they're still impactful because they're still applicable to where you're at in your life. You may not be walking into a legitimate furnace that's full of heat, but I can promise you, you're walking into furnaces all over your life that you need God to be there with you. And when the King Nebuchadnezzar says, if you don't bow down as leaders of my empire to this statue, I'm going to kill you, to make a point. In verse 16, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power and your majesty. But if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." When you read this, you're thinking these guys are destined for death. They're about ready to be murdered. They're going to be killed as an example. What a way to go out. We were faithful. We ate nothing but vegetables, didn't eat the king's meat, got elevated when Daniel got to interpret the dreams, and we were over this province of Babylon, and we were looked at as authorities, and we were over the affairs, and then we were killed, murdered, ruthlessly, relentlessly, and narcissistically because we wouldn't bow down to a statue. That doesn't sound like a heroic way to go out. They weren't worried about their image. They were committed to know, regardless of what happens to us, we will stand for what we believe. You do not have to defend yourself. In your life, you're going to have the desire that when people say something about you, to retaliate and to say something about them. Or when people say something about you, to retaliate and to defend yourself. I love this about God. How much stress could be alleviated in your life if you didn't feel the need to defend everything that was being brought against you? If you didn't feel the need to be your own lawyer, to be your own prosecutor and defendant, to be the person who is constantly making sure everybody knows that wasn't you? What if you didn't feel the need to defend yourself and you let God defend you? That's where they were at. Why? Because there was such an understanding of who God was and his power. We understand God greater when we understand his power. I love what Psalm 62 verse 6 says. It says, "He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress where I will not be shaken." Let's say this together. Say, I will not be shaken. Now I want you to say this like you've had places in your life in the last year where you have felt like the bottom has dropped out and the foundation is cracking. Say, I will not be shaken. Now I want you to say it one more time for those in the back who may not hear you very clearly, for those that are watching online that need to hear somebody say it with them. I need you to say it like you have been through something in your life where you weren't sure you were going to come out. I need you to say it like you've been addicted. I need you to say it like you've been overwhelmed by the darkness. I need you to say it like your marriages were falling apart. I need you to say it like God has brought you out of ruin. I need you to say it for all those people who have been through a fire in your life and you know God is still faithful. I need you to say it like you have been redeemed and restored and you are waiting for the great rewarder to come back and get his children. Would you say, I will not be shaken? Now give him a shout of praise in this place like you know you have been redeemed. Come on, give your king some praise in this moment that you know he is deserving of. He is faithful. We don't have to defend ourselves. I love what fasting and prayer does. It deletes everything that causes us to put pressure on areas that aren't necessary. The amount of time we spend eating things we don't need to eat, The amount of time we spend looking through phones on things that really don't help us, they just destroy us. I love social media because it keeps me connected to you. I don't get to see you all the time, but you can watch clips of things that I've done. I can watch clips of things you've done. I can see pictures of your families, see pictures of my family. We can keep in touch. It's beautiful for that. What it's awful for is when you start comparing your life to other people. And then we feel like we have to defend why we're at where we're at and they're at where they're at. You don't have to defend yourself. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we're not going to defend ourselves. But the second thing that they said that I think is a key to anything you're going to do in life, they said, God is able to save us. They said that as a declaration to let him know, King Nebuchadnezzar, everybody that we know in this known world right here is bowing down to you. They don't just believe you can lead them. They're bowing down. Things are good. But our God is able to save us even from you. Even from this thing that is overwhelming. I love what Ephesians chapter 3 says, and Paul writes to the church in Ephesus. It says, now all glory to God who is able through his mighty power at work within us. That's a concept that's interesting. He's able to do it. We're thinking, oh, he's out there. We believe you're able. But it's saying, no, he's able through the power at work in us, in that seat you're in. That's the power in you to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. What an encouragement. All the things you're praying for, God can do it bigger. All the things you're believing for, he can go bigger. He can make it greater. He can go harder. Why? Because he's able. They only understood this because they had already experienced it. You see, whenever they were men in the king's court, they said, we're not going to eat that meat. The Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were pulled out of their homes. These Jewish men pulled out of their homes by the Babylonian forces, pulled away from their families. They didn't get to enjoy the holidays. They didn't get to enjoy their school. They didn't get to enjoy their friends. They didn't get to enjoy the things that the Jewish boys did. They were pulled out of their homes and forced into the king's place and into his palace to serve him. And they're here saying God is able. I mean, I don't know about you, but you probably have reasons to be bitter for your past. You probably have reasons to be bitter that your dad wasn't there. You probably have reasons to be bitter that your mom was mean. You probably have reasons to be bitter that you're divorced. You probably have reasons to be bitter that your kids don't want nothing to do with you. Kids, youth, young people, young adults, you might be bitter right now at your mom or dad or your family or your upbringing or the fact you haven't had what other people have. You have reasons you think in your life to be bitter. All of us do. These young men were pulled out of their homes. Their childhood, their young men, as young men was pulled away from them and put into the palace of a king who had just taken over Judah for them to serve him. And here they are years later saying, our God is able. There's a lot of healing in those words. There's a lot of faith in those words. There's a lot of obedience in those words. They weren't serving God for what they could get. They were serving God for who he was. Why? Because God is able. But this is what I want us to sit on. These young men went to Nebuchadnezzar. Let me correct that. These young men were pulled to Nebuchadnezzar. And it was said that they're not willing to bow down. You need to do something about these guys. And they said, we're not going to defend ourselves. Our God is able. But the next statement is telling of really who they were in Christ. They said, even if he doesn't. And that's the question I would propose to you. You're believing God for things right now. You've gone into this fast, excited, knowing that the end result will be something that you desire. Knowing that he's going to answer your prayer, and sometimes we treat fasting like it's the magic 8-ball, that we rub it the right way, the genie will come out of the lamp, and that things are different. But my question to you is that what if everything you're praying for and believing God for, and knowing he's going to heal, knowing he's going to do, knowing he is going to resurrect, knowing that he is going to redeem, what if he doesn't? What if he doesn't? What if you can't see the change? You think I went starving all this time for nothing? What if he doesn't? What if it doesn't change? What if things don't dramatically change in the next year? Do you believe that he's still able, even if it doesn't? Because that is the power behind this story. They said, our God is able. We don't have to defend ourselves. But even if he doesn't rescue us, we will never give our lives or souls over to things that the world is telling us to do. I'm not going to sell my soul for my job. I'm not going to sell my soul for a reputation or to be an influencer. Even if he doesn't, he's still God. Faith doesn't say God is faithful. Faith said, even if he doesn't, I still believe. Even if he doesn't. The night that Jesus was betrayed, I always think about what that room must have felt like. I've been to Israel and I've visited the space in the upper room where they believe that where this Last Supper was held, and you could almost hear the sounds and smell the room when you're there, when you start thinking about the depth of the story. And you think about this incredible table laid out with the olives and the fruits and the vegetables and all of the food and all of the dipping sauces and the meats, and the way that the place must have smelled during Passover. The smell of Israel, the smell of Jerusalem, there was such a party atmosphere, such an excitement because the Passover was upon us. And Jesus lounging around with his disciples, and they're having these conversations, and everybody's there to have a good time. Nobody's thinking that there's going to be a drop the mic moment from Jesus at any point, that he's actually going to be giving up his life. Nobody saw it coming because they didn't really understand. But something Jesus tells them as a preface before he was arrested and brought back into the city. When he's sitting around the table and he's talking about the last moments and he's talking about following him, what that actually means. In John chapter 21, John, having been there in this moment, records it like this. He says, Jesus replied, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is it to you?" But he says, "As for you, follow me." He's saying, don't get lost in how other people are treated. Don't get lost in their good fortunes or their bad fortunes. Have empathy, have compassion, but don't get lost in the lives of other people. Don't think it's fair or unfair. Don't think they have it in a way that I don't. Don't get overwhelmed by what you see around you. Don't let the things prohibit you from following God in the way he's designed you to follow him. Don't get lost in it. What he says is, as for you. And what he's saying to you today in this moment, as for you, follow me. Regardless of your past, regardless of your struggle, it doesn't matter the things that have held you back that you feel are disqualifiers. He's saying, as for you, follow me. Walk with me. Watch me do what only I can. As for you, follow me. And what he's saying is that we must find freedom in the words, follow me. That has to be the place where we know we are free because he's leading us. And when he's leading us, he knows exactly where he's headed. He knows how we're going to get there and what it's going to take. And he will never stop leading. He's never going to be defeated. Proverbs tells us victory rests with the Lord. It says the horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. He's saying, follow me. What does it matter what everybody else is doing? What does it matter what it looks like? What does it matter what's happening? Follow me. Regardless of all of the doubts and the fears and the overwhelm and the comparisons and the discouragement and how distraught you become, follow me. You matter, but follow me, because Christianity is not about us and about how we feel and about what we think. It's about knowing that God is the same God. He is the King of all kings. He is the Lord of all lords. It's knowing that he is our leader. Follow him. Christianity is not about our prosperity. It's about how we suffer and how we do it in the name of Jesus, knowing that it's not meant to be a peaceful regime where we jump up and down through the lilies. It's saying Christianity is about praising God in the midst of suffering. You know, we have this old school regime that says, oh, the more we suffer for Jesus. That's not the gospel. The gospel is saying life is going to happen. It's not about not having an issue and having prosperity that everybody can say, wow, he must be a Christian. No, the world is looking to Christians to say, who can suffer and go through tough times and still praise their king? That's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were representing. They were going through a time, what we would consider to be suffering, to be brought in front of the king and having to make a decision in that moment that if you don't bow down, you will be murdered for the entire world to see. And they said, we will not, because our God is able, but even if he doesn't, we will follow him. even if he doesn't. And I can promise you in your life, you've had moments where you felt like you were at the bottom of the barrel. Maybe some of you are there right now. You're at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. You have to go to the bottom and take a left to get to the bottom where you're actually at. You're at the very bottom. You're at that depth of the depth. You're at that tight spot that you don't ever want to be in. You're there. And you're suffering. You think, okay, well, people must see God in me. I'm suffering. That's not the way it works. Do people see God in you when you're suffering, not because you're suffering? Like, I don't want to suffer. Man, I want to live. I want to have, I'm not, you say, well, as a preacher, you shouldn't want the nicer things. Man, yeah, right. I'll take the yacht. I'll take the private jet. I'll take all of it. God wants to bless me with it. Bring it on. All the donations I will accept. Why? Because those aren't markers of me being in love with Jesus or Jesus being in love with me. God wants us to have good things. He created those things. He wants to have nice things. He wants to give you good gifts. Excuse me. But what God wants more than anything isn't those things. He wants you to praise him in the middle of the suffering. He wants us to approach his throne, knowing that even if he doesn't, I still will. Because in your life, when you've gotten to the dark places, I want you to think right now, let's go on a journey. Take a moment and just close your eyes. All right? And I want you to envision a time of your life that was difficult. It could be a relationship ending. It could be marital time. Maybe you're still married to your spouse, but it was just a tough time. Maybe for some of you, it was college years. Maybe for others, it was a really tough argument you had at work, or a financial, just a moment you remember being in your living room crying out to God, or maybe not crying out at all, or maybe you were addicted, or you were passed out drunk somewhere, whatever it may be. I want you to close your eyes right now. Just think of that moment. Put yourself back there. I want you to imagine what the sounds were. I want you to hear the street, people walking on the street. I want you to smell the alcohol. I want you to remember the fear you felt in that home. And I know this is traumatic for some of you, but I'm asking you, let's go there for a second. Go there. Because it's hard for some of us to remember where we've been when we're so far removed. But this is what I want. In that moment, right now, what you're thinking, I want you to know this concept. And this is the gospel. You may have gotten down to nothing, but you've never gone without. When God was there, in that moment that you see, maybe now you could see him in a way you didn't then. You can open your eyes. For some of you, that's an emotional roller coaster we just took. That's dark. For some of you, you didn't have to close your eyes and imagine anything because you're in it. But I can promise you this. You'll never fast in vain. You'll never pray in vain, and you'll never hope that God's there. He is there. He hears your prayer. And as you draw close to him in this time of fasting, this time of mourning and weeping and joy and hope and sorrow and pain and victory, your life is never going to be the same. He's faithful. He believes in you. And he's able, even if he doesn't. That's the beauty of this story. I'm believing with you. I'm believing that God is going to do immeasurably more than you can even begin to imagine. Immeasurably more than you can even begin to fathom. He's got something for you. And I'm telling you, you are every person that is a follower of Jesus, you are standing on the edge of amazing. But trust him. Trust him. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were court-martialed to the king, ripped from their homes as young men, going without meat and eating fruit and vegetables. For many of you, that would be torture. I'm one of them. Bring on the meat. But they were faithful to God. And over time, God put them in charge of all the affairs, only to be brought back before the king and accused and indicted on not being faithful because they wouldn't bow down to an idol. Even though they served that king with honor. And some of you may be in a position where I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm still living in this indictment. I'm still living in this tough spot. God is able. But even if he doesn't, He's still able. You don't have to defend yourself. Trust God. Let this be a word from the Lord that sits in your spirit to know you do not have to defend who you are. You follow who he is. Know that he is able. And even if he doesn't, it changes everything because he hears you, he sees you, and he will align your life. God's not asking us to walk in a peace. He's asking us to walk in obedience. And that's what brings the good things in life. I'm believing with you today. Will you stand with me? You just close your eyes. I want to pray over you. I'm excited about all that God is doing. Living for Jesus is victory. It's not hard times and mundane and overwhelmed. No, it's victory because the hard times are coming no matter what. The joyful times are going to be more numerous. You're going to have greater hope and greater joy. But I'm believing right now that God is going to do things in your life. Even today, for some of you, there are breakthroughs. There are moments you're having where you're seeing things differently because the Spirit is opening your eyes to who he is. And I'm so excited for you to experience God on this level. Lord, we pray right now. I pray for each and every person listening, each and every ear that is being attentive to your word, that they would know that, Father, you've gone before them, that you are seeing them, that you understand where they're at, and you know how you've created them, but God, you have created them for a relationship with you. And before anything that comes out of them, you're going to put into them the love and the compassion. They're going to receive from you things that they need, maybe from an earthly father or an earthly mother or an earthly friend or a spouse. But God, you are the thing that fills those voids. I just pray right now that they would see that you're with them, that your hand is on them, that you love them, and that, God, you have done things in their life they don't even know about. And you're going to do so much more that they're praying for. God, so much more than they can begin to ask. I pray for a closeness and an intimacy during this season. God, I pray that they would see that you have gone before them and that you love them and that your hand is on them. God, I pray over the relationships that seem to need mending, those health issues that seem to be recurring. I pray for the mysteries that are in this room right now and online that just they can't find an answer, that, God, they will see they don't need to, but you are the answer. God, for the children, the young adults, the men and women that are crying out to you in these moments, I pray they would see that, God, you're already there and that you see them and that, God, you're going to do the miraculous, that their hands are going to heal, that their feet are going to be swift to run towards the action whenever you need to heal, and they're going to be the ones to do it because they're faithful to you. God, that we're not praying for a life of peace, we're praying for a life of passion and obedience. That, God, peace in you doesn't mean that there's not chaos around us. It just means that we're walking in a peace with you. We thank you for all that you are. We love you. We're grateful for you, and we surrender to you. Thank you for all that you're doing. God, I pray for those that are walking through turmoil, those that are walking through deep pain in their life, those that are overwhelmed by loss this past year. I pray they would see that, Father, your victory goes before us, that, God, we're not built to deal with death. We were built to be life, but, God, you promised to not leave us in death. Like, this is a part of our nature, this sin struggle, that death will happen. God, you promised to walk us through, even through the things that are self-inflicted for us, the things that we've caused, the things that humanity has created, that we weren't having to go through, this death that we have to suffer through. God, you promise I'll still be there. And we thank you for that. I just pray for peace in each and every heart. We love you. We give all these things. Everybody said, amen. Overflow City, I love you. Pastor Paul, Pastor Christina, thank you so much. I'm praying for you guys. I'm excited about what God is doing. And let's go Commanders. See you guys.